Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv, Wolok, my partner in crime, as always, Vasili, Gianarakos. We just had to have an episode today. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good. Obviously, a lot to talk about. Flyers make a
Yes,
trade.
sir.
Morgan Frost, Joel Farabee, longtime Philadelphia Flyers, former first-round picks, traded to the Calgary Flames for Andrei Kuzmenko and Jacob Peltier, as well as a 2025 second-round pick and our 2028 seventh-round pick. So big trade, lots to dissect. I'm excited for this episode, man.
Yeah. So for everybody listening, we were going to record on Sunday. We ended up recording Friday after work for you Americans, East Coast folks. For other people, for me, it's 11 o'clock at night right now, almost 11:30. Um,
But
we
we
just
have to
had,
get this episode out.
yeah,
Yeah.
we had to get it in. We had to be part of the conversation. Let's be honest. It was on our mind as well. It's obviously big news for us too. I don't think we necessarily anticipated at this point. Maybe we anticipated like kind of soon to be some kind of trade. I think it still kind of was bigger than what we anticipated. We saw like something, but we thought it would be a pretty quiet trade deadline.
Yeah.
I guess we can consider this a trade deadline just because Four Nations is around the corner, and but there's still time. So it was
Yeah.
unexpected.
Definitely
Unexpected.
an impromptu deal. And it's kind of funny, though, that you have Danny Briere's press conference just a week before,
Yeah.
and he's kind of stating, hey, like, there's no rush to make a move. Once you make a move, you can't hit undo on the trade button. It's
Yeah.
almost like hilarious that that statement happens, and then almost a
Yeah.
week later, he kind of makes a trade. So yeah, there's a lot to dissect, a lot to go into. We're gonna break down like the benefits for the Flyers in this, potential cons, potential risks. So
Yeah.
there's just a lot to go over. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun episode. It'll be primarily surrounding the big trade here. Before we do, let me just get into the usual spiel here. I just want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell for notifications so you get notified of when our episodes come out. Just like this one, which will come out at a random time. Our episodes are a little all over the place, but again, we just couldn't really wait till Sunday to record. Um, and again, for the audio version, go to Spotify and iTunes and give us a follow and a rating there as well. You'll also get notified when we release our audio version. That is the best way to support this podcast. Also, a shout out to our sponsors, Jim Steak at 4th and South. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim Steaks. They have one of the best, if not the best, cheesesteak in Philadelphia. Go stop at Jim's Steaks and go get yourself a delicious cheesesteaks from Jim's. Also, Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim's. Oh my God, my brain just farted on me in real time. Mind you, everybody, it's 11:30 at night here, so just give me a little bit of grace. Summit Public Adjusters, they will help you with all of your insurance needs. Maybe they'll buy you a cheesesteak, but primarily they're going to help you with all your insurance needs. They're going to facilitate all of the annoying processes between you and your insurance company. They'll make sure you get the best service and quotes from your insurance companies and make sure you get exactly what you need. Again, Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. And why not? Ask them if they'll get you a cheesesteak. Maybe they'll do it.
Maybe.
Also want to give a brief shout out to our partner, SportsSpider.com. Guys, if you're tired of searching multiple websites for sports news, SportsSpider.com has you covered. They collect the latest articles, videos, and podcasts from around the web and organize them by your favorite teams. If you want to stay as up to date on our Philadelphia Flyers or the NHL in general, make sure to check out SportsSpider.com. The link for Sports Spiders in the description. They are our partners. Our stuff is pinned at the top. Make sure to check them out. Okay, let's go through a little bit of Flyers news, and then we'll go to the big news. But just want to get this as kind of like cleanup work. This has happened over the past couple games, but there are some transactions that happened as of today. Obviously, Owen Tippett being hurt created some lineup changes. Adam Yinning was called up for a game. Then he was sent back down. We don't know who's coming. Maybe Emil Andre, because Yegor Zamula has been officially put on the IR. So we suspect maybe Andre is going to get the call.
It would make
Again,
sense. So we'll see.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Yinning kind of came up. Team didn't have a good showing. Don't think you can necessarily blame him. Um, Maybe Eric Johnson's healthy again. We'll kind of talk that out. And then as of, I don't know, a few hours ago, Alexei Kolosov has also been recalled from the Phantoms. So, and that's an interesting story because I don't know if it's an injury of some sort.
Yeah, nothing's been announced in terms of
Right.
Ursin Fedotov being hurt. Jamie Baskow obviously is on the ball, so he kind of pointed out that Fedotov had a little bit of a sequence yesterday in the game where he like
Right.
slammed himself, so maybe potentially an injury. It is something to note that it's the AHL All-Star break this weekend. So maybe this is like a reward for calling him up just to like put him on the NHL roster to pay him an NHL salary for a few days. Like I really am not sure. So we'll have to see,
Point.
but it is
Yeah.
AHL All-Star weekend, so we'll see what happens there.
It's true. They don't play until February 8th.
Yeah.
So they have
Maybe
off
some extra
9 days.
insurance, right? And with Zamula going on IR, you have that extra space to call him up. So
Yeah, but you would think they would need a defenseman.
it's a strange one. I'm sure there's
I
going to be
guess they,
something else to follow with that call up. Like Danny Briere does have a press conference tomorrow morning, I believe 10:30 a.m. with local media in Philadelphia. So I'm sure that will come up in terms of like why did Kolosov get called up as well. So we'll
yeah,
see what Briere has to say there.
that'll be midday for me. Yeah. So again, we don't know how injured Owen Tippett is. Ryan Paling is still injured. So Abels and Richard are still in the lineup as of now. No forward call-ups have been made at the AHL level since then. No Lixell, no Tuamala. Yeah, so a little juggling going around with the roster. Um, but I don't think any of it is as big of an impact as the story that we're about to talk about. One that kind of came out of nowhere a little bit in its timing. Both players have been rumored. And again, Vasili stated the trade in the opening. I'll repeat it once again. So Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee have been officially traded to the Calgary Flames in exchange for Andrei Kuzmenko, who is a name that a lot of people should probably know at this point. Jacob Peltier, a 2025 second round pick, and a 2028 seventh round pick. So quite a bit of assets moving back and forth. Probably the biggest trade the Flyers have made. At least since the Gauthier trade, though, obviously only three pieces moved back and forth there. With
Provorov as well was a pretty big one in terms of just like
yes,
pieces moving around between
yeah,
the
you know
two.
what? This is probably similar to the Provorov trade, though that one I guess was like a little less
Yeah.
surprising.
And you
Uh,
have to factor into like long-standing flyers, right? Like Provorov at that time was a long-standing flyer. Like Farabee and Frost at this point, they're 8 years removed from being drafted. They've been flyers their whole careers, so they're one of the two most long-standing players technically that were on this roster getting removed here, right?
yeah, both pieces gotten in the Braden Shen trade have officially moved on.
It's
Um,
crazy. It's crazy that those guys in that trade get drafted together, obviously, then get traded together all these years later. It's almost like they're kind of attached
well,
at the hip a little bit.
Joel Farabee was drafted the following year.
Yeah.
Frost was drafted in the Nolan Patrick draft.
Yeah.
So they're officially out of both first round picks from those two, or I guess all three first round picks from those 2 years are officially gone.
Yeah. Crazy to think.
Which shows you how people freak out over first round picks and how guarantees are a lot more worth it. So let's get into the trade. So let's talk about it on the Flyer side. So we talked about it quite a bit here. Let's start with Morgan Frost. You know, I kind of stated this pretty bluntly a couple weeks ago that, well, let's start with this. It was quite obvious that the Flyers could not come into next season with the same roster they have this year. You know, we were talking about it. This is an entertainment business. Things are starting to get stale. You cannot come back in the next season with the same roster you had. We knew a shakeup was coming of some sort. We thought primarily it was going to be done in the offseason. We just didn't think that a big move would happen this season, but it looks like Danny Briere decided to be more aggressive in season. Maybe, you know, it's not a trade that makes the team better for a playoff run, at least on the surface level, though. I do contest that concept a little bit. We'll get into that. Um, and Morgan Frost being an RFA, I talked about it. I was like, I do not understand what kind of contract this guy can get from the Flyers that he'd be satisfied with. And that's why I thought the Flyers were going to move on from him. It's not that he had no value. It's not that the Flyers hated him. It's not that we saw zero role for him, but I'm like, he wants an extension. He's not going to want the same amount of money. He's going to want some kind of raise, and we're not going to want to give it to him because we don't believe what he's shown us so far is enough to invest in him for the foreseeable future. So let's start with Frost. What are your thoughts about just Frost being moved in general?
Yeah, I think in a sense, a little bit of writing on the wall. I just don't know with Frost, like if him and Tortorella were really ever going to get on that same page. Obviously, you don't know how long Tortorella is going to be here moving ahead. That's a factor too, right? Like I think they were looking to see if Tortorella could bring something out of Frost over these last few years here to kind of see if they can maybe get a spark in him and see if he can take that next step to push himself beyond that 40-point plateau. And at this point this season, he's on pace to essentially hit that same kind of mark again, 40-point type season in the mid 40 range. And there just doesn't seem like there's been a lot of consistent development for him over the last couple of years. Like he's stepped up to that point, and he's a guy that at certain points you see it, he's really on and he's flashy with the skill and can have an impact in games. But I just think the inconsistencies in his play over time here were just too large and too kind of evident, and that's why the Flyers ended up wanting to move on from him, right? Because why would you extend a guy that you just have not seen much progression from over the last 3 seasons? He's essentially had similar seasons. These last 3 years were very slow starts, inconsistent on a game-to-game basis, hot second half, but you can't always count on that, right? You need a player, if you're going to be paying them potentially $4 to $5 million, because that's what he's looking for. You want to pay a guy that type of money to bring you some sort of consistency and stability at the center position. And those are things that the Flyers, at least at center right now, are lacking, even removing Frost. But I think their idea is, hey, let's not spend this money on this RFA that we know is inconsistent and hasn't shown the ability to actually like step up and be more consistent on a game-to-game basis. Let's try to spend that money elsewhere for maybe somebody else that we think can bring more consistency overall moving ahead. I think the cap space is a big factor. I also just think maybe they weren't interested in re-signing him after this season, so why not move on from him, try to get something, and see if you can use those assets that you acquired in this trade to maybe parlay it into something else down the line, or just the cap space itself is an asset, right?
Yeah, no, I 100%. I'm not surprised Morgan Frost was traded. He was one of my most likely players to get traded, and I think Torts has been relatively right. Now, maybe it's his fault for not getting more out of Frost. That is definitely up for debate. Like some people can blame Tortorella, some people can blame Frost, but the reality is, at the end of the day, he did not solidify his position, and he was given opportunities. And,
ample opportunity,
And if you look at the situation with Michkov and how a lot of people kind of penciled him and Michkov as like line mates and thought it would be, and I think the Flyers were hoping for that, and that was not the case at all. They almost had no chemistry together. I know a lot of people thought they did, but I never thought they did from the very beginning of the season till this point in the season. I never thought they looked good together, and I don't really blame Frost for that specifically, but I think that was kind of the hope, that they were hoping that a guy like Frost could have good chemistry because they're looking for dynamic playmaking centers.
I think the tough thing with Frost too is you saw so many games, like there was a handfuls of games throughout his career as a Flyer where he would really actually take control of a game and dominate certain shifts and really stand out and like have an impact. And you would see those flashes. And I think it's just a frustration in the sense that you see that skill in there, but you're just not getting the consistency from the player to be able to do it on a nightly basis, right? And I do think like for players like that, that's not necessarily because like he's not trying or like he doesn't want to be that player. I just think sometimes guys never progress beyond that level. They only end up being that second line, third line type of player. And to be honest, I feel like with where Frost is, I don't think it's that much of a risk here because I think you could probably replace his production with the cap space you opened up. And potentially, I mean, I know Kuzmenko, obviously we're going to get into the pieces the Flyers acquired. Like Kuzmenko is an unrestricted free agent and all. But, if he does have chemistry with Michkov, does have a good showing, I feel like the offensive production that he could bring already probably replaces what Frost can, in my opinion. So
Yeah, I mean, look, they're definitely taking a hit down the middle, especially right now with Paling out. But again, for all those people who didn't believe Danny, who said that this team is in a rebuilding state, this is a rebuilding type of move. They probably freed up close to $10 million of cap space for next year, just on the surface level. Now, Peltier is an RFA. We're going to get into him a little bit later. Um, but it clearly is a move that hints the future. And we're going to get deeper into that. We've been talking about this offseason for so long already. I feel like every move that happens points towards it, whether people believe us or not. And this is definitely one. So let's talk about Joel Farabee. So Farabee was the one where I was more reticent to move this guy. Now people can knock on him, but when he was on his game, he is a guy who's like a Swiss Army knife type of goal scorer, like two-way type of dude with leadership ability. I think he's the real reason that Calgary kind of pulled the trigger on this trade. I think this is probably what they were waiting for, was the Flyers to give up a Joel Farabee in this trade. I think they were interested in Frost for a while, as was rumored, but I think the Flyers being willing to throw Joel Farabee into this trade kind of made it happen for them, because Farabee is a guy who, again, he's a year younger than Frost. People can say whatever they want. I expected a breakout season. We didn't get it from him. He did play really well at times, but still didn't really produce. You have 2 games in a row now that the Flyers haven't had a goal. I don't think the decision was made because of these 2 games, but I think the Flyers are still really struggling to score on a consistent basis throughout the year. They kind of have these spurts where their offense takes off, and then it spurts where their offense kind of falls asleep. And if you look at the Flyers' current lineup, their depth at wing, especially now, I guess even after this trade, is pretty robust. And in the depths of this humongous draft that's coming for them, with now having 7 picks in the first 2 rounds
it's
alone.
pretty crazy to think about. I can't think of a team that's had 7 picks in 2 rounds like in a lifetime. Like I'm sure there has been.
I think
Like
the
there's been
Montreal Canadiens and
Buffalo's, Edmonton's, like bad
there's
teams over
been
the last decade. I just mean like it's very rare to see it, right?
yes. I can recall like one maybe recently that had a lot also, but it was something like this, some kind of stupid number, and it was a tanking team. Not a team so much like the Flyers, which were able to be in the bubble space. And I don't think this is going to significantly drop the Flyers in the standings, too. So let's get into the return, because I've been kind of listening to opinions, and the general opinion is that the Flyers lost this trade. A lot of people kind of in the media, really, really riding on Farabee and Frost's value, and how Kuzmenko and Peltier's value is like all-time low. You can kind of make the case for like Farabee being all-time low right now as well. They're very excited about it for the Calgary Flames. A lot of people feel like the Flyers kind of lost this trade, but I think this is a lot more nuanced, a lot more even. I just think the Flyers incurred risk on this trade, in the sense that, both of these players could, with a change of scenery, get to where the Flyers were hoping they would get to in Philly. Now, having said that, both of the players they acquired kind of fall into that same pool as well. Obviously, the second round pick is valuable. And we've talked about it quite a bit. We don't even know if they're going to draft all of these picks that they're getting with 7 picks.
I would be surprised, to be honest. Like, when do you see a team make 7 draft picks in 2 rounds? Like, I would imagine some of these picks will be ammo for some sort of deal. We will see, but that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there. So the value. So let's go. Well, let's go through the players themselves. So this trade definitely hints at the future. Let's be honest. Like Vasili already mentioned it to you, the cap space that it opens up in the off season. We talked about how it's $10 million. Kuzmenko is a UFA at the end of this year. Now, Kuzmenko came into the league. He had a successful KHL career, one where he didn't like have a Michkov like KHL career, but he was one of the better players in the KHL. Came to the NHL with the Vancouver Canucks in his mid-20s. People probably thought that they had something similar to Kirill Kaprizov, not necessarily on his level, but not that far away. I mean, he put up 70 points in what? It was 74
I
points in 81 games, I think was his first
Yeah,
season.
so with the Canucks in his rookie year, 39 goals, 35 assists for 74 points in 81 games. So obviously a lot
Playing
of
with
talent.
Peterson,
Uh,
Elias
yeah,
Pettersson.
Yeah, he played with Pedersen. Obviously, a lot of talent for Kuzmenko. Was a point per game before he left SKA in 2021-22 there, 53 points in 45 games. And then he dropped off, right? His second season, only 21 points in 43 games, goes back to Calgary, gets traded, gets 25 points in 29 games to
It's
end off
pretty
the
good.
2023-24 season, almost a point a game.
Half
And
a goal a
then
game.
yeah, then this season a little bit of struggles. 15 points in 37 games. So yeah, like for a guy like Kuzmenko and the Flyers acquiring him, like it's definitely possible that they don't resign him. He is a UFA, so like when you look at this move from an overarching angle, a lot of it really, to my thought process, seems to be like cap space is the major play here. The Flyers potentially could weaponize so much cap space, right? Getting rid of Frost, Farabee, potentially letting Kuzmenko go, and then obviously resigning Peltier. Obviously, who knows what's going to happen? I think Kuzmenko is really up in the air. I think it just depends on what happens in these last 30 games and kind of what his performance is. I don't think that the Flyers would be opposed to re-signing him. If they put Ryan Ellis on LTIR next season, they're going to have a projected up to potentially $32 million in cap space. So like, I don't know if he would be worth a $5.5 million contract based off this season. If you could sign him for maybe 3.5, 4 million, and he actually looks pretty good to end this season, maybe it's worth it. Like my thought process with Kuzmenko specifically, and then we can go into Peltier, Yariv. My thought process with him is just that, like, even though he's on an expiring deal, it's almost like a tryout. Like he's played with Michkov in the past. They've had chemistry and have worked well together. So let's see if they can kind of rekindle that during this stretch. See if he can kind of maybe help Michkov, because obviously, being Russian, helping out, his former countryman who's a rookie and kind of navigating his way through the rookie season, that's super valuable. And I think having a guy like Kuzmenko around could be valuable to Michkov's development potentially. So I see it, see the reasoning from Briere's perspective as to why Kuzmenko was an interesting piece to acquire, because not only was he a former almost 40 goal scorer, 39 goal scorer, like he's obviously very talented. There's also other, factors with Michkov to think about as well. So my thing is like, you have a guy in Frost and Farabee, or guys in Frost and Farabee, like Morgan Frost never scored more than 19 goals in a season before. Joel Farabee has had a couple 20-goal seasons, but he's never scored more than 22 goals. You have a guy in Kuzmenko who scored almost 40 goals before. People can say whatever they want that he's fell off and such, but I think there is a lot of talent there. How is he going to mesh with Tortorella?
He's the most talented player in the
That
trade.
that's what I mean. How is he going to mesh with Torts? How is he going to mesh with this team and fit into the style of play that they want to play? Who knows? That's left to be kind of seen here. But I do think there's a potential for him to be re-signed. Like I see a lot of people kind of scoffing at that, but obviously we'll
They're
see. Like,
they are
but
jump. I'm sorry. Go. You know what? Finish your thought. I'm sorry.
yeah, I was just gonna say that, like, obviously he might not be re-signed, maybe he will, but I just think it's too early to tell. I think his
Yeah.
performance over this stretch will really dictate that, because why would you just let a talented player like that go, especially if he shows some chemistry with Michkov and kind of regains the form that he showed when he first got traded to Calgary?
Yeah, no, I think that's very well said. And I think a lot of people are kind of jumping the gun with this. That's why I brought up the media thing, where I'm like, people are like, oh, this is what it is. And I do not trust the media's scouting abilities for shit. Just so people are aware at all. At this point of how much hockey I watched, like, I'm not saying that they're wrong, but people jump the gun so quickly as to what a player's value is and what he's going to do where he's at, and they're almost never right. Okay?
Yeah.
They're so rarely accurate in their statements.
Well,
So don't take everything they say with a grain of salt. Even if they are right in the end, they really don't know. They don't.
Well, that's what
They're
I mean.
not
This
scouts.
story's yet, like, there's still a lot left to be told here in terms of what's going to happen. Obviously,
Yeah.
with Kuzmenko, I would say too, like he waived his no trade clause to come to Philadelphia. That's
Well,
another aspect to add into it. So I mean, it seems like he has no problems being here at least, and that's a positive, right?
yeah, well, apparently the Flyers went and talked to him, and kind of told him that they need his skill. Now he does have a skill set that the Flyers do need. I mean, we're not like lighting the world on fire offensively, especially on the power play. It's been a
He's a great
disaster.
power play player. I mean, like if you can, I guess another angle to it with Kuzmenko, Yuri, before we get into Peltier is that,
Well, we're not going to jump to Peltier. We're good
yeah.
on Kuzmenko.
But either
Uh,
way, like before we get over, like I would say that Kuzmenko, in terms of like his value here, let's say the Flyers acquired him to maybe trade him at the trade deadline. Like maybe their thought is let's play him on the power play, give him top minutes, try to recoup some value, and trade him for another pick. Like I don't know
well,
if that's their thoughts, but it could be a possibility too.
it could be, but the fact that he waived his no movement, his no trade clause, I doubt he's gonna want to be traded again.
Probably not.
It's possible, but I think they legitimately brought him in understanding that he probably will be here the remainder of the season. And like you said in the beginning, right, it is a tryout to see if there's a potential future contract here. Now, every team takes this approach. Calgary is taking the same approach with Frost as Farabee is, oh, in our system, we can get more out of them. And maybe Calgary is more accurate than the Flyers are, right? But I've also heard people call out. I also heard the way people reacted to Owen Tippett, and look at the way Owen Tippett manifested and turned into the player he is today under the Flyers. He's considerably better than he is with the Flyers as he was playing with Florida. He was an AHL player when he was with Florida. When we get to Peltier, we're going to talk about him as well there, right? They've identified something in Kuzmenko. They think potentially they can get something out of him. And if they can't, they're not locked into anything. And Danny Briere talked about this in his press conference. He is an older player. He turns 29 in a couple weeks here, maybe 3 weeks. I think he's like the 20. I forget the exact date of his birthday, but a little less than 3 weeks. He turns 29, so he's not a young guy anymore, right? He's kind of in the prime of his career. Now, maybe he won't gel with Torts, and we're going to talk about Torts a little bit later after this. But again, they have a window here where they can kind of do whatever they feel they need to do. And like Vasili was saying, maybe there is chemistry there with Michkov, right? Maybe, and again, he plays the offhand on the left side, and Michkov plays the offhand on the right side. The reality is that this team has not been very good offensively for a little bit. And look, this is not the type of trade I necessarily would have looked at, but there has to be more behind this. And we all point to the offseason. And this, whether it be, in season figuring it out or the offseason figuring it out, there's an opportunity here to either walk away from the deal or sign him. And the upside on it is very high if it does work. If he comes in here and puts up, even in the remaining amount of games that he has, if he can put up, 15, 20 goals for the Flyers, then he becomes an attractive player. I don't think that he's going to get some kind of monster deal from the Flyers, but he might get a short-term deal. Like Vasili was saying, maybe a 1, 2, maybe even a 3-year deal, but nothing that they can't get their way out of. The reality is this team lacks veterans who can score on a regular basis. And we
Yeah.
talked about that over and over again. And that
Uh,
is required for a
And
young team.
the benefit of this in terms of Kuzmenko is there's really no risk at all, right? Like if he comes in here and he doesn't fit, you say goodbye, you take the cap space that you accrued from, offloading that Farabee contract and getting rid of Frost, and you kind of go on your way, and you can either, use that cap space and potentially try to acquire somebody in a trade to fill that
Yes.
void, or you can maybe make a signing in free
And
agency. So we have to see, but I think it just puts them in a more flexible position in general. Whereas, like, if you keep Farabee and let's say this decline continues, there's a potential to never recoup any value, right? Like, you have to factor in that in terms of like Farabee's production, like last season to this season, right? Like he went from 50 points last season in 82 games, 22 goals, 20 assists, to 8 goals and 11 assists, 19 points in 50 games, right? There's been a stark drop off. So the Flyers essentially in this situation are saying, hey, like, we're not sure what's happening here. We're not sure if you're going to be able to get back to that level that you were at. So let's try to get rid of this contract and use that cap space down the line to
Well,
help us out in another area or to maybe address the center position, right?
I also think they were hoping for more out of Farabee when they drafted him, and I think they were hoping they could build on last year, not take a step back.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, the weapon that the Flyers have at their disposal in the position that they're in will be cap space and assets, which primarily right now are young players and prospects and picks. That's what they have that are their weapons. They are not a cup contending team, right? So if they're opening up more cap space for the off season, that gives them more leverage in trades. That allows them honestly to take a risk with potentially making some other trades at the trade deadline and carrying more cap because they're going to have a substantial amount of cap. And we're going to talk about the cap in the second half of the episode. And I think the Kuzmenko trade, look, on its surface, like my buddy Anthony, who's been on this podcast before, he's like, I love it. And I'm like, I don't know if I love it. I need to marinate on it, and we need to see how it works out. I'm not going to say this is a clear-cut win trade for the Flyers, but it's one where I see the logic behind it, and one where I can see the chess pieces moving in a way where this does work out for both teams and works out really well. On the surface level, maybe a lot of people want to say that Calgary won this trade outright. We'll see how things develop. Having said that, I do think that there's a chance that Calgary gets their win, but typically trades do
Yeah.
work for both sides.
I think one thing to know is like you're completely correct. Is I like this trade is one that I think works for Calgary for certain reasons, works for the Flyers for certain reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, Joel Farabee, right? Like I think he is a player in this trade that might have the most offensive upside potentially. Like we've seen him produce at even strength at like a top 5 level in the league, almost with Nathan McKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, McDavid. Like there were stats last year when he was on a run like that, and he was in the same echelon as those guys in terms of 5-on-5 points produced at points produced at 5-on-5. So I would say like for Calgary, they're banking that he's going to turn it around in their system. Who knows if that's going to happen or not for them, but like that's what their thought is. I think for the Flyers, like you potentially might get the most talented player in this trade in Kuzmenko. Whether he can turn it around in Philly, who knows? But the nuance for me in this trade is just the fact that I think it sets them up for further moves. Like I think this is the first move of many to come here in this offseason, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I think
so
it's
too.
a nuanced move that the Flyers kind of use to their advantage to say, hey, we can get rid of these two guys, free up more cap space, give ourselves 30 million potentially going into this offseason, plus 7 draft picks in the first 2 rounds. And when you think about assets in that way, not only can they use those 7 draft picks to either maybe move up in the draft, make a trade for a center, who knows, or what may have you, but you just give yourself flexibility for so many moves that you might have not been able to execute on if you would have kept these guys and had them on your books, right? Like you're kind of locking yourself in. Another thing I want to get into as well is like you have Farabee and Frost, kind of like Frost, I believe, turning 26 soon. Farabee close to turning 25 years old. You get a Peltier back as an RFA. We can kind of shift into Peltier a bit here, Yariv, who's 23-year-old. And if you kind of look at, the players that the Flyers and Dan Hilferty mentioned in their statement out to season ticket holders, they did not mention Frost. They did not mention Farabee. They mentioned guys like a Noah Cates, like a Cam York, like a Bobby Brink, like a Tyson Forster, guys that are all around like 21, 22, 23-year-old range.
Well,
Peltier,
not Noah Cates, but yeah.
well, not Cates, yeah. Peltier's 23 as well, so he kind of does fit into that group a little bit more of like a Mitchkov, Brink, Forster in that timeline. So I kind of understand it too. What's your thoughts on like Yariv, the Peltier addition to the trade? Do you think that's a good pickup for the Flyers as well in this deal?
Well, let's get into Peltier. So let's give people a background on Peltier, and then we'll get into my opinions. So Jacob Peltier is a former first-round pick that's kind of irrelevant at this point. Same with Farabee and Frost. But Peltier was a 26 overall pick in 2019, a Quebec Major Junior Hockey League prospect. He was above a point per game player for majority of his seasons. 4 of 6 or 4 or 5, sorry. I'm sorry, 3 of 4, and some of those are multiple teams. He did very well at the juniors level. Again, a first round pick caliber player. He's been pretty much a point per game player at the AHL level, had some stints with Calgary, and then this year was kind of I don't want to say breakout, but he finally started putting up consistent points with 11 points in 24 games, 4 goals, 7 assists, plus 10 player. He was playing a bottom six role for Calgary. Now, we don't know his exact ceiling, but like Vasili was saying, he doesn't turn 24 until March. So he will be 24 at some point this season, but he is a little bit younger than Frost and Farabee. We know that his game probably suits Tortorella's game. He's got an edgier side. He might be like kind of like another Farabee in some kind of way. And he is primarily a left wing player and a true left wing, left handed side player. So we don't know exactly the extent of this guy's ceiling. This is another case of a guy who had a really good run with Calgary. They had high hopes for him. He didn't so much live up to the name so far. So again, a change of scenery might bring out more in his game, and it might be like an Owen Tippett type of situation where it doesn't mean, look, Owen Tippett was a top 10 pick. He was slated to be like a 30 to 40 goal scorer in the NHL. Maybe Jacob Peltier is not that guy, but maybe they got themselves like a 20 goal scorer in the NHL. And I think that's what the Flyers are kind of hoping for, is to maybe find a replacement for Farabee, who right now he's on an 800K cap hit. He is an RFA, probably not do that big of a raise. Maybe he's going to make 1.5, something like that. Maybe get a bridge deal of 2 years, something like that at 1.5. So again, another cost-controlled player for the Flyers. And my guess is that somebody that this team has been watching and scouted, maybe even wanted to take themselves in his draft year, and now saw him available in a trade like this. So I'm intrigued by Jacob Peltier. I'm not exactly sure what to get from him, but it's another one of the case like Kuzmenko where they have a trial here. Again, he's an RFA too at the end of the year, so
Yeah.
they could theoretically opt out of signing him too,
Or they could try to trade his rights
or they
and
could
get an asset.
trade
Yeah.
him as well. I don't anticipate that, to be honest with you, but it looks like kind of like a change, and maybe somebody that a guy like they thought it would be a good fit for a guy like Tortorella. Where Kuzmenko, on the surface, a lot of people are kind of poking fun that Tortorella is not going to like Kuzmenko. That might end up being the case.
Maybe.
Right, but we
Yeah.
don't. That's the thing. None of this is really known. It's kind of like that cynicism
It isn't. Well, it isn't
that people
unknown.
approach everything here in
Well,
Philadelphia.
people just think that, because Manko clashed with Tocchet. Tockett's a similar coach to Torts. He's obviously going to clash with Torts. That's not necessarily the case. They're two different people. Like,
First
they
of all,
might have
Torts clashes with everybody.
Yeah, but they might have similar philosophies in coaching. Like, I'm sure there's going to be some non-negotiables in Kuzmenko's game where, like, if he's missing back checks and coverages, sure, he's going to get benched. But I would have to imagine Briere and Jones probably not warned him of that, but like probably said, hey, like, there's a certain way that this coach is going to ride you, and you kind of have to respond in a manner that kind of allows him to instill his system on you at least a little bit, right? Where you're like playing as a unit. But in terms of Peltier and just his addition to the trade, it's pretty intriguing, right? Like, I think, he's a late first round pick, similar to, Frost and Farabee, essentially. Gets picked in 2019, 62 points in 66 games in the AHL in 2021-22, 37 points in 35 games in 2022-23 at the AHL level, 19 points in 20 games this season in 2024-25 at the AHL level. So essentially point per game guy. Usually, scoring like that at the AHL level, there's no guarantee it's going to translate, but to me what it signals is that there's a potential for a breakout coming here. Like, obviously he's a guy that's figured out the AHL level. Now, like, can you do that now at the NHL level? 11 points in 24 games. One thing to note, his points per game is actually more than Joel Farabee's this season. He has a 0.48 points per game, and Farabee's is 0.39. So technically, you're getting a more productive player who's a little bit younger this season, at least. So we'll see. I think Peltier, like, they're definitely, I don't want to say definitely resign him, but I would be surprised if they didn't. Like, I don't think there's going to be a huge contract or anything due to him. Probably a couple $1 million type of extension. From what I've seen in terms of scouting reports, like, he's a guy that's tenacious on the forecheck, similar to like a Bobby Brink, perhaps, in terms of being a small guy that can really, attack on the boards, win board battles, but still has like some skill and edge to his game. Apparently is as well very speedy, also has a decent shot. In the World Junior Tournament a while back, he was a point per game player for Canada there too. So like there is offensive upside with him. I'm seeing a lot of people kind of pencil him in as like being okay. He's going to be a third line player for sure. I wouldn't necessarily say that there isn't a higher ceiling, like potentially maybe like a middle six, top, like second line as a high end for him. Like I think for a guy like Pelche, he's super young still, only 23 years old. With the point per game seasons he's had in essentially all the AHL games he's played, like I think there's a potential for him to maybe, be that 20 goal, maybe 50 point type guy, maybe at the NHL level. We'll see. I think that would be his, max of a ceiling, like a 50-point player. But if you are able to kind of turn him into that, and Tortorella can kind of get that out of him, and he's tenacious for you on the forecheck, I think it's, an addition that's going to be welcome to the Flyers, and apparently plays a style of play that would be welcome in Philly, like a very hard-nosed type of player. So I'm interested to see like where it goes with him. But I think that like, people kind of just earmarking the Flyers for a loss for this trade, first of all, aren't recognizing that, Pelchier has had similar production to a Farabee and Frost when they were first entering the league. And Kuzmenko, like we said earlier, has, one goal removed from potentially having a 40-goal
Farabee
season.
had a really good first year in the season. Well, we should say that. Didn't he have a 20-goal season his first year?
Joel Farabee? Let me check right here.
I think so.
His first season, he had 8 goals in 52 games. Second season, 20 goals in 55 games.
Second season, sorry.
So yeah, like, I mean, he's obviously produced, but I'm just saying, like, for somebody to look at Farabee's production in that second season of 38 points, I think that Pelche might not be able to match that. Like, 38 points isn't breaking the world or anything. That's what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah, so. No, I hear you. In how many games has he played? Total 50. Sorry, I'm doing the math here. So it's 61 games. He's got 21 points. And that's over 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like he's only played 61 games in the NHL. That's what people need to understand. Like he has not yet even played a full season at the NHL level. So
that's the problem, is that people see a 23-year-old and they go, all right, he's already fully developed. There's nothing left here. And I don't approach it with that mindset. But look, overall, the cap flexibility was the big motivator around this trade. I think that's quite obvious.
Yeah, exactly. Just the flexibility that you're not locked into to potentially Frost, that we're going to have to re-sign to some sort of extension, at least a 2-year deal. And Farabee has got 3 years left on this deal. So I just think for the Flyers, getting that flexibility, getting that extra 10 million in cap space essentially here, also the extra draft pick, I think it was an enticing thing for them. And also something to point out that Anthony DeMarco of Daily Faceoff mentioned is that the main objective that he heard of this move was that the Flyers wanted to move away from Farabee's contract without retaining any money. So, and that's what they did here. So if that was their goal, I consider it a success, just in the sense that you get 2 players back that might be able to match these 2 guys' production. They have a little bit of a tryout here. If they don't, and you don't like what you see from them, you can waive bye-bye, and you still have the assets you gained in the second round pick in 2025, the 7th in 2028, and the found money in trading these 2 guys away. So I just think the flexibility that it sets them up for in the future here, totally. It's worth it, right?
So yeah, let's talk about those other 2 assets. So the 2028 7th round pick, that probably won't come into play for a while, obviously, just being years away. Maybe something the Flyers will even trade themselves. Kind of like a throw-in to that one. I think they just wanted another pick, and that's probably the most Calgary would give up in that trade. Now, the second round pick, we don't know how high that's going to be, but probably middle of the road second round pick. It adds to their arsenal of second round picks already. That gives them 4 in the second round this year alone. We talked about moving up in the draft this year. Clearly the Flyers have been very up and down this year. They still kind of sit in that like 10 to 15 range in the draft picks. Maybe this type of trade will bottom them out a little bit more, like people want. It is possible. It seems like they're kind of doing that on their own at times.
Yeah, exactly.
I also think this team kind of needed a spark. So beyond the assets, just the change in the locker room.
What's
Again,
the shakeup, right?
yeah, I realized that like halfway through the season, I'm like, you cannot go into next season with the same lineup anymore. It doesn't
It's
matter
too
if they
much
have
of a
good.
status quo, right?
Yes, way too much. The group stopped progressing. You had to kind of spark things. You can't reignite the fan base with the exact same roster. You already pulled the Michkov card. You know, Luchenko was already here and sent back down. Unless you get like a top three pick this year, right? And you walk away with Hagens, you really don't, or like Schaefer or something like that. You really don't have that name out there to kind of pull fans into the building without making a
Yeah.
shake-up trade. Now, the cap flexibility, the two additional picks, really just the one, the second, that gives you the more flexibility for what we've been kind of telling people for a while, that this offseason was going to be big and that the next two off seasons are going to be big for the Flyers. And maybe they wanted to get on that early. And you talked about moving away from Frost. Look, we don't know what kind of options will be out there. Teams will be moving money around. There will be other players available, and obviously the Elias Pettersson rumors are kind of flying now because he's former line mates with Kuzmenko, and people are kind of being like
Yeah.
Kuzmenko, Michkov, and Pettersson. Like, I don't know. Okay,
Yeah, like that's kind of jumping to conclusions, obviously, and that's what's
but
happening.
they have
online with
the
rumors.
the assets to go get him.
No,
Having said
that's what I wanted to say. Like now that they've made a trade like this, not even before making a trade like this, like the Flyers did have the assets. So like they've equipped themselves here, right? Like if they want to make a move going ahead. And I think that's kind of the purpose of this trade, that they're getting ahead of, okay, let's create our space early
Yeah.
and kind of signify like this is the direction
Yes.
we're going towards. We're trying to add and make moves essentially this offseason. And I do, want to point out, right? Like this is something that, at least for Frost and Farabee, like these are guys that are well-liked players in the locker room, right? Like these are guys that, even though, like at times they kind of got squeezed out of their roles, I would say. Like that's something that Elliot Friedman mentioned in his podcast, like 32 Thoughts. He was saying that like these guys get squeezed out of their roles. At certain times, Frost getting scratched, Farabee getting scratched, getting placed all over the lineup, but they still just played through it. They didn't complain. They were troopers and were really good teammates. And like guys in the locker room recognize that, even though, maybe they're not in the place that they should be in the lineup, they're still, being team players. So I think from the locker room perspective, it's a huge shakeup, obviously, but it might be one that's a good thing, right? Like sometimes stagnation and status quo and keeping the same lineup for such a long time, everybody gets a little bit too complacent, and maybe this kind of gets people on their toes and like, hey, this is still a business. Like trades can happen. Like we need to really like wake up here. Maybe we could get moved. So it could act like a wake up call for some players as well in this room. Like I have seen the notion that people think, okay, Flyers trade Farabee and Frost here. They're really trying to tank. Like they're really going to fall into the bottom five of the league here. Certainly a possibility. Maybe it'll happen. This could also spark the team and act as a shakeup in a positive manner too. And I don't really see anybody mentioning that. So we will see.
I don't think Farabee or Frost have been playing well enough to tank this team. I don't think this team has been riding off the play of Farabee and Frost. So I don't see that happening. But it could. I mean, it's possible. But seems unlikely. Let's talk about some lineup combinations. So I'm looking at Puckpedia, and they just threw this together, obviously, from the trade. As of right now, what they have is left wing Tyson Forrester, Kate Konechny, and this is based off of the previous couple games. Second line, they have Jacob Pelletier, Couturier, and Bobby Brink. Third line, they have Kuzmenko, Lawton, and Michkov. Fourth line, Richard, Abels, and Hathaway. So first of all, I think when the lineup does, kind of change, I think obviously Paling will come back in and Owen Tippett will come back in. So these lines probably will not stick to what they look like right now. I think
once those guys return from injury, to a different setup, right?
Yeah, I do think our center core will be Cates, Couturier, Lawton, and Paling, which are all more defensive players, especially Couturier. At this point, Cates has been the team's number one center this year. So I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of sticks in that top six with Couturier for the rest of the season, or maybe Paling gets rotated in there for a little bit. But where do we see Peltier and Kuzmenko playing? I think it's quite obvious that Kuzmenko is going to be played with Michkov, right? Like I
Yeah.
think that's definitely going to be tested first, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a major reason probably why Kuzmenko was enticing to them. The Russian factor to maybe help Mikheikov along. Also the fact they played together in the past. So like to acquire him and not play them together would be a little bit of a weird
Yeah.
move, right? So I'd imagine it's those two together. I would be interested to see Couturier between them. Like I've heard some things and people say are that, because Menko's not the fleetest of skaters, so maybe you have him and Couturier together, and Michkov in the hockey sense kind of works its magic with those three. So I wouldn't mind to see that as a line potentially.
Yeah. I mean, there's also the option that he plays with Travis Konechny, who like Kuzmenko
Yeah,
specifically,
maybe.
because they've been looking for kind of they have the Tippett and Konechny line going, but they don't really produce together. I've been talking about, like, I don't like when they play together. I don't think it's
Because they
necessary at all.
both they both need the puck. That's kind of
Yeah,
how their games roll. I think Kuzmenko's a little bit more of a passer, so that maybe could help Konechny a bit. But
yeah,
I'd anticipate it's Michkov and him to
yeah.
start anyway.
I think they're gonna try that to start. Obviously without Owen Tippett there, I think we'll probably see something similar to this. Jacob Peltier is the guy where, I get their logic why they have him with Couturier and Brink. We'll see. I don't really like any of these lines though. I mean, I still want to see Michkov played with Konechny and Couturier. I think that they should try TK on the left hand side again. I mean, they tried it in the very beginning of the season where you shouldn't have tried it, and now when it's
Yeah.
later in the season and Michkov actually has the experience. Now we should also point out that Michkov was just benched for half a game. The screaming on the bench, I think, is irrelevant because we've seen that. We saw that with Nick Seeler earlier.
It's also
Like,
super, super loud in an arena when you're on the bench like that. So like sometimes not to say like, oh, the guy's right next to you, but like you're naturally talking louder. So it's gonna look like from somebody observing you that you could be shouting,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and I think Tortorella's being extra harsh. I didn't agree with the benching.
I thought
I
Mitchkov
thought
looked
he
really
looked
good.
good. I thought he was like, it's funny because I was watching the game later and my phone kept blowing up and I was ignoring my phone, and I thought it was like, oh, Mitchkov had a big game. That's like what I kind of felt, but it was all the trades that were
Yeah.
happening. It was everything was about the trade. But and then Michkov scored, and I was like, oh, I was like, it's definitely gonna be one of those games. Then it was recalled. Obviously, he's the only guy to put the puck in the net in the past two games. I thought he was kind of everywhere offensively in that game, and I think he should have been a little more forgiving. Now maybe he was right because Michkov didn't want to take ownership over that, but they're definitely treating him differently than other players. They are holding him to a different standard. He might be frustrated with that, but again, you're kind of slated to be a franchise caliber player here. You were on a generational pace up until lately. Right now, he's kind
Yeah.
of slowed down. I think a lot of that is due to conditioning more than anything. Um,
Yeah,
and
that
they,
Michkov benching is just strange in the sense that like that Couturier Michkov Richard line looked good. Even the game before they looked good. And then obviously the goal happens that Holmstrom scored and there's a little bit of a missed coverage and he's stapled to the bench right there. Like you kind of everybody who listens to this knows my opinion. Like I would have just maybe you sit him for 5-10 minutes in the second, put him back out there, make your point, and like have him work through it. I'm guessing the coaching staff, it's a repeated mistake at this point, and they want him to take accountability for it, and that's kind of the reason for it. I do have the quotes here from Tortorella
yeah, go
from the
for it.
presser, so I can read all this out. So yeah, the question to Torch was the Michkov benching. Did something happen on the bench? And he said, I've said all along here with him, we are so far ahead of the process with him being here this year, and that continues even tonight. We're trying to teach him how things are done here, the things of understanding conduct of a pro and all things you do to play. I'm not going to get involved in the situation, something on the bench tonight. I'm not going to give you specifics. You may not believe it, but it's for the right reason because we care about him. I care about him and where he is in the process, how far he is along in the process. And I'm not going to fail him by cowering away from situations that people may second guess or whatever it may be. We're going to do it the right way with this kid because we think he's special. So it's my job to do that no matter what happens.
And then the media followed up with Torts and said, did he have dialogue with you that you liked? He said, yeah, but there's certain situations where you need to accept responsibility. I guess that's the general term I'll give you. I don't want to get too involved in it because it's unfair to him. I get put into a box sometimes when these situations come. This is to help him. In my heart, it's to help him, and I'm going to do the things I think I need to do to try to help him, and we're going to continue to go through the process together. Does the language barrier make it harder? Tortorella stated he's much better understanding it, and he's much better saying it too. I think he can speak better versus understanding, but he knows the situation that happened tonight. He knows some of the other situations he's gone through. He's getting so much better. You guys might think I have four heads up where when I'm sorry, you guys might think I have four heads up here when I'm sure you see what happens on the bench. That is good to me. That is a couple of people, a player and a coach going through some conflict, but some honesty coming along with it. He's going to understand one way or another how we do things here and what's expected, and that accountability on the ice and the accountability of being a pro. So that's Tortorella's kind of whole statements on Michkov's benching last night.
Yeah. And, I was thinking about this now as you were talking about, like, I think back to other points, like when the Flyers picked up Ville Leno and Briere and had Hartnell, and they were all struggling, and they put them on the line together. There was something to that maybe they kind of help each other get out of this. It's kind of, Tortorella is very much of the Herb Brooks model. Like if they hate you, they're, they can't hate each other, right? They're kind of in the trenches
against you, exactly.
Right? They're kind of in the trenches, with your kind of harsh rule over that. Now, I just think I thought it was a little excessive. Again, I don't really care about the loss because I'm not expecting this team. Like, I want to make the playoffs, but I'm not expecting this team to win, any kind of cup or anything. Especially the way they played this year. They've been so up and down as a team. Like
just too inconsistent as a whole.
Yeah.
Like I think at this point it's pretty safe to say, like, for them to get to around the 90-point mark to be in contention for the playoffs, they're gonna have to win go like a 600% winning percentage going ahead in the last 30 games. Like they haven't done that all season, right? So
yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah,
but...
well, maybe, look, the reality is Kuzmenko does have a lot of skill. Pelletier might bring some energy they need. We don't know what's really going to happen here, but I think we're going to look at probably very different line combinations over the next couple months, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And it does give them options to do that. The depth at center, though, considering now you do not have any playmaking centers, like true playmakers, it's going to be interesting. Most playmaking is going to have to be done off the wing, which is not ideal.
Yeah. But like back to this and just the Michkov situation, like I just think it's a long-term view, just like the trade, right? Like I think the Flyers realize, hey, if they make the playoffs this season, that's found money. And it's the same kind of thing like with Michkov and him producing and the way he's playing on the ice. Like obviously if he's doing everything that they want him to do and he's adapting to this defensive style they want him to play and these new things he's trying to learn and pick up, it's all found money and it's great. He's a rookie in the NHL that barely knows English, though, so we have to be realistic that there's going to be ups and downs. And
well, he's going to have a line mate who can communicate with him now.
Yeah, that'll be helpful, and I think that's a whole aspect to this as well. But I just mean, like, there's going to be ups and downs. He's a rookie. He's never played this many games before. I don't like the benching. I'm not for it here. But we've seen in the past Tortorella do things like this with players throughout his career, and it's usually been for the better and impacted them positively. Like, just go back to last season in the tough love with Bobby Brink, and look how Brink's playing this season.
I thought about that. He would do that with Brink often, where he would bench Brink for pretty much just nobody cared because Brink is, a high second round pick and not a high first round pick.
Exactly.
Right. So nobody.
But that's what I mean. We saw the exact same thing with Brink last season, and look how it's paid off for his development in terms of much better at the forechecking, much better in terms of the defensive play. Obviously, there's still some lapses for him, but he's improved a ton. And I think you have to look at something like that and say Tortorella was able to turn Brink and kind of teach him the things he wanted him to learn, that he thinks he should, be in his game at the NHL level. You have to, I think, give him the benefit of the doubt.
He's not wrong.
Yeah, he's not wrong. That was a missed coverage. There has to be accountability. I personally wouldn't have benched him for the full game. I think bench him for a little bit, let him go back out there. But he obviously has his own method to doing things. So I just think at this point, let it play out. what they're doing with Michkov now, it's for a long-term vision of what he could become as an overall player. Coach these bad habits out of him now, very young, just to ensure it doesn't get instilled, down the line when you're trying to win with him as your centerpiece, right?
I watched a video online of, how Sean Avery's been doing this like online commentary.
Yeah.
Specifically about the New York Rangers because he's a former Ranger and I believe he still lives in New York City, so he's probably a Rangers fan. He was watching Panarin, just calling him a lazy piece of shit, because Panarin clearly completely ignored his back check, and the player that was his man ended up scoring the goal all the way coming the other way on a turnover that Panarin was part of. And it's like and obviously Panarin is a phenomenal player and he can get away with those moments because he's such a good offensive player. I think Tortorella prefers that Michkov doesn't end up like that. And it's like, and Michkov really hasn't been that way, but like this is the opportunity to kind of coach that stuff out of him.
He's such a young player. Why not do it now, right?
If Michkov can be, again, he'll never be like a Selke winning player. I mean, it's possible, but it's unlikely he'll be a Selke type of forward.
No.
Right, but he does have the ability to be tenacious on a back check, to be aggressive, to have a really good stick, and it'll make him a much more valuable player offensively as well. And be able to retrieve the puck.
It's just instilling these habits, right? Like you said, okay, Panarin, look at how far he's in his career making that mistake. Like Michkov's gonna like a talented player, gonna be a guy that puts up a lot of points in this league. But like, imagine 5 years from now, the Flyers are in a playoff game in a situation, and he has a play like that, and he kind of misses a back check, and a goal ends up in your net, and it costs you a big game or something like that, or it'll change an inflection point in a game. Why would you, as an organization, let it get to that point when you can kind of teach him now in terms of how you would want him to play in those certain situations and hope he can adapt, right? Like now is the time to instill those things as a young player. It's harder to change a guy that's set in his ways, and they're just trying to make sure that he doesn't get set in those bad habits. So obviously nobody wants to see, one of the Flyers, if not their most, offensively talented player, get benched. I personally would have handled it a different way. Maybe bench him for, like I said, a period, put him back out there for the third and see what happens. But there's a method to the madness. We've seen it work with so many players for Torts. So I just think you got to let it happen. And it's like the trade that Danny Briere made, for Peltier, Kuzmenko, and the picks and freeing up all the cap space. It's geared towards the future. This decision to bench Michkov is also something that's geared towards the future, right?
And it's uncomfortable in the short term, but hopefully it pays off in the long term. So let's talk about Tortorella. So he's on the last year of his deal. I know that people are probably thinking about this. A lot of people probably already want him gone because that's typically what happens in most sports teams in general, but definitely happens, as a consequence of being average, but also, his tenure has been long here. So for a coach, because we've seen a lot of coaches get fired quicker, and he's going to finish out this season. That is obvious. He's got 1 year left on his deal. He's probably not going to want to sit around with no deal, kind of in no man's land. So the reality is, I thought there was a chance he could be extended. I think there's a point that could happen, but it wouldn't be a long extension. Maybe it's 1 year on top of that. I am leaning towards the fact that the Flyers are most likely going in the direction of where he's going to finish out his contract. He's going to move into a front office position. He's going to help select the next coach of the future. And then if something goes wrong with that coach, they can always pull a Lou Lamoriello and put Tortorella back. Like if they fire that coach, pretty early on in his tenure, if it was the wrong guy, they can always rely on throwing Tortorella kind of right back in there. I know that sounds like a little weird, but it does kind of give you insurance when you have
flexibility.
An all-time, but you have an all-time coach like in your organization.
That's what I mean, flexibility for them if something like that does happen, right? So
it's interesting for sure.
So how do you kind of see this? I don't think Tortorella is getting fired at all.
I don't think he's getting fired. I mean, I'm interested to see kind of what happens this offseason just with the 1 year left. Like my assumption is he'll probably play out the deal, or not play out the deal, but he'll probably coach out the deal his last year and then move up into that front office position, as you said. There's always a chance though that maybe after this season he kind of steps back and says, well, you know what? There's only 1 year left. We're in a transition period of, trying to kind of turn this team into a contender. Maybe this is a perfect time for me to step back now, and the Flyers hire a new coach this summer. I think, that's probably a slimmer chance of him just finishing his deal out, but that's also in the cards too, right? I think it could be a potential outcome. We'll see if it happens. I would say it's a slimmer chance, but I wouldn't rule it out, especially if he thinks that with the potential moves the Flyers are making, let's say adding like a bunch of centers or like making a bunch of trades, or with all the cap flexibility, making a lot of moves to kind of change the shape and the structure of this roster. Maybe he even realizes it might be time to get the new voice in there to start next season with all the changes happening, versus, okay, we have me as the coach for 1 year, then bring in the new voice, and it's a whole new system and kind of like a whole new philosophy in the locker room, right? It might be better to start fresh if you get all those new players in this offseason. So I think maybe a lot of it hinges on each other in terms of like what the front office does and Tortorella does. Obviously, he has the guaranteed contract, so it'll be up to him, but I wonder if those are like conversations that are kind of ongoing.
Yeah. And I would imagine if the Flyers were to even replace Tortorella, there would have to be something big out there that would even have to be tempting. And I think most likely we're gonna have him for one more year as head coach of this team, and then he's gonna move into the office, and we'll probably have a new coach, and we don't know who that'll be at the time. Hopefully, we get a new power play either coach or specialist between now and hit the end of his tenure. But the Flyers might be waiting that out and just still building on the culture of this team. And that might suck to kind of for people to think of, but there's going to be a lot of changes to this roster. And I think we're seeing just the tip of the iceberg there. And I think they're going to want Tortorella to affect those players as well as they come in here, because if he's moving in a front office position, it's still going to be the position of the team. And he's going to be influencing their attitude overall as an organization. That's not going to go away, I don't think. And I don't think it should, to be honest with you. Now, maybe it should be handled differently, especially when the Flyers are in a different state. But the attitude overall, I think, needs to stay consistent. All right, just want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe or hit the notification bell for notifications to get notified when we release our episodes. If you liked our content, please like the video right now. I mean, you can downvote it too, but likes are better. So
likes would help.
Yeah. I mean, downvotes help too, but I prefer that you guys like our content.
Any interactions, really, just give anything you want, that'll help.
Yeah. And for the audio version, go to Spotify and iTunes, give us a rating and a follow as well. Again, these are the best ways to support our podcast. So just want to talk a little bit about the cap. This kind of was coming out today too. It's been pretty busy, probably because the Four Nations tournament's upcoming here. So
yeah, lots of news. The Flyers are making trades, calling people up, sending people down. NHL's, making cap kind of moves in terms of like cementing, this is the cap numbers for years to come. It's pretty crazy.
We had that huge Rantanen trade not too long
Exciting time for hockey fans.
So right, I'm going to quote Frank Cervalli on this one because he gave me the upper and the lower limits, and I thought this was crucial. So I'm just going to read out the projected cap space for the next 3 years, and this is between the agreement.
And wait, Yariv, before you do that, Frank also added,
this isn't merely a projection of cap increases, but it's an agreement between the two parties, NHL and NHLPA. So they're expecting this to be it.
Right. I think they just don't want to name it as like a final number because it could still shift between now and then. But
it's pretty
profitability.
Close, right?
Yeah, I mean they're pretty much projecting their profitability for the remainder of the year, but it's not built on 1 year of profitability. It's on a trend. Right, so maybe year 26, 27 could be a little bit different, or 27, 28, but most likely we're going to fall right around here. If anything, maybe I think it might go up, not down. So the upper limit of 2025-26 is $95.5 million. The lower limit is $70.6 million in 2025. Then again, the following year, again, goes up another $9 million, just about. The upper limit being 104 million and the lower limit being 76.9 million. And then in 2027-28 projected to be 113.5.
That's a ton.
The lower limit, being $83.9 million. So obviously, the Flyers building up more cap space. Again, this becomes a huge weapon. I do not expect them not to do nothing between now and then. They have RFAs. They have Mitchkov, who's going to need a deal eventually. There's going to be a lot going on, so I wouldn't expect like $60 million opened in 3 years or whatever. But
they're going to have a significant amount of space to make some moves. And I mean, it is something to note that the cap ceiling right now is 88 million. So even to next year's 95, that's already an increase of 7 million. And then you're going with even bigger increases the following year, 9, and then the following year too. So the NHL is projecting obviously the revenue to really increase, and that's kind of why they have these figures. But from a Flyers perspective, it's enticing because not only would they have had, even if the cap wasn't going up, they were going to have a lot of space just based off like their contract management, what Danny Briere is trying to do, obviously offloading Farabee, offloading Frost. So this adds even more space to their plans potentially, and it could give them flexibility to make even more moves. So once again, these off seasons, there's a reason kind of why we outlined it this way, going back to last off season, that these two off seasons coming up would be huge, and it's just because there's so much money the Flyers have to play with and so many draft picks that there's something that's bound to happen. It's kind of
something just like is brewing.
Yes. Yeah, it's pointing to this. You wouldn't be operating in this manner as a general manager, as an organization, if you weren't going to do something here. So
yeah, and this is why we keep telling everybody 2 years. I can tell a lot of people who listen do not believe us.
Yeah,
that's okay. You don't have to, but
the moves the GMs are making.
Yes, and the money is what makes it so evident that what they are doing, this move that they made, only speeds that up. And then you look at contracts like Konechny, that's going to be a steal, right? Because that's going to be like a $6 million contract today.
Think about the AAV percentage of that cap. It's going to be even lower as it continues to rise. So it looks like a great deal. Yeah. But like one thing to note, like with it going up to 95.5 cap next season, like the estimate, the Flyers will have $25 million in space. Like there'll be players to sign, but that is just a considerable amount of money. So
yes, I mean they do have some. They have a substantial one in Cam York, but again, this is kind of what I was about to say. Is like Couturier's $7 million contract becomes a lot more tenable at $7 million when the cap is going up the way it is. Ristolainen becomes an absolute bargain, even though now I think his salary is about right for what he gets paid. Sanheim,
even Tippett's deal, right?
Yes, Sanheim, a bargain. You look at the fact York needs a deal. You lock him up long term, and if you can get him sub $6 million, that's a steal. If you can get him around $6 million, you're golden. You look at Cates, lock him up long term. There's no way the Flyers want to move Noah Cates at all. He probably wouldn't even be a huge cap hit. So you try to get Noah Cates locked up long term. Maybe give him a 6-year deal.
Yeah.
You look at a guy like Tyson Forster. You probably will not be able to give him a long-term deal. He's going to bet on himself. He's an RFA,
which is smart for him and his agent to do, to be honest,
right?
With his skill sets,
right? Exactly. So most likely he'll take a bridge deal, most likely around like $2 million or something like that. So the Flyers are going to lose, let's just say, $10 million of that 20-some, but they're probably going to have, if they don't make any move without LTIRing Ryan Ellis, they're going to have $10 million at least in cap space to just play with, and that's without doing anything else special. And again, Jacob Pelletier is right, exactly. Jacob Pelletier is still an RFA. They haven't made any deals, and I look at it like I look at a guy like Nick Seeler, who they locked up long term. I'm like, okay, who says we have to keep him for the entire duration?
But that's a point. That's a point I wanted to make with this cap situation as well. Like,
and that's without the buyout money coming out the following year too.
Yeah, we also have to factor in, right, like a ton of guys that have gone bought out and money that's dead that will come off the books too. But something to kind of note with the cap space is like when you have all these players, when you have all these players that are locked up, at smaller percentages of the cap going forward, they become even more valuable trade assets down the line for you too, because you could say, hey, like look at the cap hit that this guy has. He's locked up to a very efficient deal, doesn't take up a lot of AAV in terms of the overall cap percentage. How enticing does that become when you try to maybe move some of these guys in maybe hockey trades to make your team better as you start to try to contend here? So
like I think they're set up in a good way going ahead just for the cap. Now I'm interested to kind of see just what they do with the space, what they do with the draft picks.
They have no double-digit contracts at all,
Yeah, exactly. In terms
where most teams in the
salary,
league do have
that,
one.
that's what I mean, though, right? Like, if you're the Flyers, you've got to think about it from that perspective. You now have the cap and the potential and the assets to finally add those players who are making those deals, those upper echelon type players to kind of, fill out the roster, try to make it into a contending roster here. So, well, I just think all this stuff and the cap going up, it just even
Well,
further
you know who
evidence.
could be a UFA too.
Uh, I'm not sure, but I was just going to finish my thought and say, like, I
Sorry.
just think it's further evidence that, like, they're going to be active this off season with all this space, all these assets. But
Yeah, like
I'll
I'm
be a
not
UFA, Yariv.
I'm not saying that they're going to go after him, but like guys like Mitch Marner, who I don't know if he's even going to make it to UFA, right?
Yeah,
But
that's a good point.
but
Exactly.
like a guy like that, one, it becomes easier for Toronto to sign with the cap going up. But there's other teams that are going to be in positions where they're not going to be able to give. Like, look at what just happened with Rantanen, where guys are going to come in, demand big money. The Flyers don't have a big name right now. They're going to be able to slot that guy in. If it's a center, they're going to be in a position to hop on that, and that's what they need to do: is accrue all these young players, build a good core around them. The cap will continue to go up, and then when that player is that available that you covet, you can go and get him, and then add him to the slew of good
Yeah,
early 20 players, some good veterans. Like they're probably going to make more deals.
Of
Let's be
course,
honest. We're
yeah,
not
yeah.
going into next season with pretty much the same team they have this year. I can't see that happening. I really cannot.
Well, yeah, I just think the point of this is like maximum flexibility, see what opens itself up for you, and then make deals accordingly based on what you kind of need to add to your rosters. That's what I think they're trying to do. So we'll see what becomes available this offseason, but it's going to be exciting, just because there's just so many factors going into it: the cap space, the assets with the picks, even guys on the roster that it's more flexible for them to trade potentially. So yeah, we'll see where it all
I
goes, but
I, I
it's interesting.
also I also wonder with the cap going up, and I don't know the nuances of the deal. Like, will bearing in the minors will that number go up? Right, because right now you can bury up to 1.1 million. You can be able to bury up to 1.5.
I'm
You
not
know,
sure. It's possible, yeah.
because then you look at some players that are in the NHL right now that are making above $1 million. All of a sudden they become a net zero, and like we still have a guy like Nick Delorier, like he's still got a little bit of term left. Like we have other guys we can remove from this roster that we can send to the minors or do other things with that. We can get those cap hits back. So I think the cap going up is going to change a lot for the Flyers, and I think it's going to open up some serious doors. And again, I almost can't wait for the off season now more
Yeah.
than the rest of the season
Yeah, because it's going to
because
be
because that's obviously what the direction and the focus is for this team. It's the off seasons ahead and what they're going to kind of do to reshape this roster to try to turn it into a contender. I think it's safe to say, like, at least for me, with what's happening now, like obviously Briere, these first two seasons, it seems like it was an evaluation period. Like, you subtract Provorov, you
evaluation and
subtract
cleanup.
yeah, you subtract Provorov, you subtract Hayes, D'Angelo's out, Atkinson's out, Frost is out, Farabee's out. They took their time with some of those guys like a Frost and Farabee. They did give them 2 seasons here to kind of see what they could do, and they decided, hey, it's best for us to move on from these guys. Let's use the cap space to our advantage. But to me, it just seems like they're at that inflection point now, at least in Briere's tenure, where we've made these subtractions, and this offseason is really going to be the time where it's, let's make the additions. We have the core that we want. Let's now add the pieces around them due to the fact we have all these assets to either make deals or this money to add players through trades that are big contracts or make free agent signings potentially in the next couple seasons. So
Yeah,
I think it's that time, and we're probably going to see moves ahead here. I wouldn't be surprised.
yeah, totally. All right, let's get to the last segment. Plus, I'm getting tired here. It's almost 1 a.m. All right, let's get to the prospect segment. So, wanted to do this update last week, but we kind of ran out of time. The Phantoms had kind of a big weekend game. They won 9-2, and just want to do some updates from the Phantoms and also a few prospect updates. We're not going to do a full readout of the list or anything like we normally do, but Zayd Wisdom had his first professional hat trick. If you look at his stats in the second half of the year versus the first half, I mean, he's like probably at point 0.7 points per game right now at the AHL level. Again, that doesn't mean he's going to come into the NHL and light the world on fire, but I thought at one point they were just going to let him walk. And it seems like he's completely turned his season around and is becoming a valuable AHL grinder slash power forward. Looks like maybe he'll even be like a call-up territory guy next year. Pretty exciting stuff to hear that Wisdom, nets his first hat trick. Again, a big win for the Phantoms in general. It was a 9-2 win, and Kolosov was in net for that as well. But just a big night overall for him. In that same night, and I'll read these out and I'll let you react, Vasili. In that same night, Massimo Rizzo had a goal and 2 assists. He's also been putting up points since now officially being healthy. Started off very cold coming back from the injury, understandably so. Adjusted to the pro level and is now putting up points. He had a 3-point night. The other night, Emil Andre had 2 assists. Hopefully that, again, leads to him getting called up. I think we all want to see him back up with the Flyers, especially now that Zamula is on IR. He was also a +2 in that game. So it was a big game for a lot of guys. Also, Louis Belpedio, I'll just add this. He's not a prospect, but he did have a 4-point night. 1 goal, 3 assists.
That's a huge night for him.
Yeah. So he had a 4-point night for himself as well. He's nearing at like a half a point a game as a defenseman. So pretty good night for the Phantoms, and a lot of guys walked away with some stats there. What are your thoughts, Vasili?
Yeah, it's positive. I think the last time we kind of went through the Phantoms, they were getting blown out themselves. So I think it's good for them to kind of flip it around on other teams and, have a big points night, right? I think the most encouraging thing for me for the Phantoms this season, honestly, is Zayd Wisdom, right? Like, just think about how he's turned it around after a couple of really underwhelming seasons. He's really put himself back on the map, I think, as a potential like bottom 6 prospect for the Flyers who can really bring some physicality and tenacity. So I'm happy to see the fact that he's starting to produce again, and hopefully that, this is enough to earn him another contract here and potentially maybe force his way into like a 4th line type of role or things like that. Like, we'll see what happens with the deadline, but maybe if the Flyers do subtract a bit more, he finds himself into some NHL games here. Also Rizzo 3-point night. That's pretty encouraging. Like, a guy that, dealt with injuries to starts, and he's a guy that I think has been having a lot of success with the Phantoms lately, just in terms of point production. He's looked a lot better as of late than, when he first kind of entered into the lineup. So it's encouraging stuff. And then Kolosov the win too, because he I believe his first couple starts, they were losses, correct? So
yeah,
it's good for him to get
just getting their asses kicked.
That's what I mean. It's good for him to just get into the winning column, feel good about himself, because I don't think he won his last few games with the Flyers when he started, gets sent down, loses right off the bat. So for him to kind of get back into the winning column, it's good for a young goalie, right?
Yeah. And I also forgot Tuamala also had a goal and assist in that game as well, which, again, I think everybody's still kind of excited about him. I'm hoping he gets a call at some point. Maybe not this year now with all the wingers, but still exciting. And I guess at the lower levels, we'll talk about this. This happened last week that both Alex Bump and Cole Knuble are Hobie Baker considerations for NCAA Player of the Year. Cole Knuble has been consistent all year with being above a point per game. He's got 27 points in 22 games. Alex Bump has 25 points in 22 games, and Alex Bump also had a 4-point night the other night last week, 4 assists in that night. He also had a 3-goal weekend a few days before that. So he's been on fire right now. And it's pretty exciting to see. And I think, when we talk about losing Joel Farabee, Alex Bump is a player that maybe he will end up replacing Joel Farabee. We still don't know what's going to happen with him, but I suspect he's going to get his ELC at the end of this season and then come over to the Phantoms next year. But he's a guy who's kind of a dark horse to make the Flyers out of camp. He is not going to be 20 years old coming into his NHL season. He's going to be 21. It's going to be interesting because we know what Brent Flair said in the offseason, that he called him an NHL player. So I'm very interested to see what's going to happen with Alex Bump, because he's heating up. He's fully developed at the NCAA level. He's a goal scorer. He's a thick 6 foot tall. Like, he's not thin. He's thicker than Joel Farabee. He's about his size, and he's a shooter. So looking forward to see what happened there. What do you think about the Hobie Baker considerations?
Yeah, I think for both of those guys, it's encouraging to see that, they've been playing so well at that level that they're going to be considered to potentially be player of the year. For Bump, I'm not really surprised, right? Like we heard Flair call him an NHL player before the season started. So I think it's expected at this point that he would be putting up numbers like that. For Knuble, I didn't really have this penciled in for him. So I think it's definitely like a really positive sign for his development for sure. He's a guy I'm really intrigued too, just because he is a center. Flyers obviously, in terms of center prospects, do need more. So the fact that he's having a great season is a really positive thing for their center depth down the line here. So good stuff. And I would expect Bump to get a contract once the season ends, to be honest.
Yeah. And Cole Knuble doesn't necessarily project to be a top 6 guy or anything, but maybe a solid bottom 6 forward.
Yeah.
Also a guy that most likely he will probably play an AHL role before he makes his way to the NHL. The last segment that we have is, and this came out last week. Again, we didn't get to this, but Bob McKenzie released his updated rankings for prospects. Again, we're going to do a prospect show with Steve Kornianos. I actually texted him about the recent trade too. He agreed with us that it seemed like a Flyers like off-season play. But he released updated rankings. I'm just going to go through the top 10 real quick, but the biggest news there is that James Higgins has lost his position as the clear-cut number 1 overall, and now it's Matthew Schaefer, who apparently has a heavy lead playing for the Erie Otters. He is injured right now, but apparently he is the clear-cut number 1, so he's a defenseman, and that sits at the number 1 spot after Higgins being number 1 for so long. And I did watch the video content, and they called Higgins a second-line center. I don't know. That seems to be brand new to me. I'm interested to see what Steve Kornianos is going to really say about this, but he had Schaefer at number 1, Higgins at 2, Michael Misa at 3, Porter Martone at 4, Anton Frundell, the Swede, at 5, a center. That might be a guy the Flyers are heavily looking at. Caleb Denoyer, Elliot Denoyer's brother, is ranked number 6, a Quebec Major Junior League hockey player. I suspect he probably will drop more than that because the Q League always drops. Roger McQueen at 7. He's injured as well. He's been injured all season. Victor Eklund, which is a big story of this draft, is injuries have definitely held guys back. Victor Eklund, he's sitting at 8. Jake O'Brien, another center from the OHL, he is at 9. And Jackson Smith, a defenseman, is at 10. He's a WHL. Just some interesting stuff there. We don't know too much about these prospects, so we're not going to speculate too much about any of it. But again, with this upcoming draft, we're going to be heavily focused on it as we get towards the end of the season here with 7 picks in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, exactly.
So you look at some of these names like... several of them will be Flyers. So
potentially, yep.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to get Steve back on to give more of a breakdown, like on the the specific prospects, their skill sets, what we can expect. Like obviously we have some insights on the top guys, but once you get later down the list, that kind of runs out for us. So we'll get Steve back on and really try to get the insights on kind of this draft class. Hopefully we see a strong end though after like a little bit of a rough start for a lot of these guys.
Yeah, and there's also a couple goalies in the second round ranked there, a Russian and a Swede. So you look at the fact that Flyers have so many second round picks, one of them might go to a goalie, especially after losing Carter Hart. Who was a former second round pick. That could be one of the most tempting things for the Flyers in the second round, is to try to grab another, beyond Zafragin, beyond Bjarnason. They're going to need somebody beyond those names too to ensure their future.
Solidify the depth at goalie. You can't. I mean, it's always
we see how fickle it is.
It's always smart to draft at least one goalie in every entry draft, I would say, just so you keep restocking the position. So hopefully we see the Flyers take a goalie. I think with all those picks, it's probably a guarantee at this point. But
we'll
see for sure.
Depends where they finish. If the Flyers finish in that bottom 10, we're going to be talking about a lottery draft, and if they can win a lottery and they can grab one of these top forwards like Roger McQueen or Michael Misa or James Hagens. We know what our
Or
biggest
even
need
a
is right
Matthew
now.
Schaefer. I mean, obviously
Yeah,
he's a defenseman, but
don't get
he
me look.
looks really, really good.
Look,
so.
if you get first overall and the best player available is a defenseman,
You gotta take him.
you grab the defenseman, and you worry about your center problems later because you can trade a defenseman or you can trade other assets to try to find a center.
Exactly.
But it's very difficult to find a franchise caliber defenseman, just like it's difficult to find a franchise caliber center. But if you can somehow figure a way to grab one of these top centers, I mean, that'd be huge. To have not just Luchenko but another top
Another young
prospect.
prospect who,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. It anticipates to be like a first line center potentially. That would be huge for the Flyers. We obviously know that's their biggest need. So I think with this draft, like in all the picks, it's going to be real interesting just to see, firstly, if they make all the selections. And then secondly, like if they are in that top 10, you pick like fifth or sixth. Let's say, do you use some of those picks to move into, second or like third or try to move up and get your guy? So like, I just think all these like the trade that just happened, fully push the focus to the offseason. The fact the Flyers have so many picks, makes this upcoming draft really enticing and interesting. So I just think for Flyers fans, for people who, are interested in the team, it's a really important time, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens like to this team in the next 6 months, because I do think the roster and just where they're going is going to substantially change in the near future here.
Yeah, we're in. I think we're in for a very crazy offseason.
Agreed. Yeah.
It's just going to be good for our show.
Exactly.
And good for Flyers fans. I mean, if we're going to be sitting in mediocrity in the standings, we want to see progress towards building a cup contender. And I think this offseason is going to be the real first step of that. And we've been talking about that for a while, Vasili, and I think this trade that we just saw was evidence towards that. And it was
setting the stage for what's to come here, in my opinion.
And it was a risky trade. I mean, you traded two guys who
are established NHL players at this point. Yeah.
With still some upside too. So, and you see people like kind of scoffing at it, but my cousin here has a saying, and I've been like loving it lately. He's like, wait till the end of the story. You can react to things in the middle of the story, but why don't you wait till the end first before you react?
Wow, that's a great way to end the show, I think.
Yeah.
Also, because like, yeah, go ahead, Yariv. I was just gonna say because when you look at it, right, like this is one move that's kind of prefacing a whole list of other things that are going to happen this offseason. So really, it's just the beginnings of the story. First couple chapters here, we're going to see kind of how it ends off the next couple off seasons, I would say.
Absolutely. And on that note, let's end this one because I need to get to bed and I still need to edit and get this thing on the internet. Vasili, anything you want to leave our audience with?
No, I'm going to have an article written up, so that'll be out tomorrow morning, so that'll be paired with this, so keep an eye out. It's going to be a full breakdown of the trade from my perspective, full analysis, so check that out on flyersnittygritty.com. Also, just go on the site right now. There's a ton of other articles talking about this trade and kind of the perspective for the Flyers, so everybody check that stuff out. We got a lot of content coming for the fans and for everybody paying attention to the Flyers right now.
Yeah, well said. And also just want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe, hit the notification bell and notifications to get notified of when we release our episodes in case we throw a curveball at you like we did today. Also, for the audio version, go to Spotify and iTunes and give us a follow and a rating there as well. And also a shout out to our sponsors, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. They have one of the best, if not the best, cheesesteak in Philadelphia. Public Summit Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Go to them for all your insurance adjustment needs. They will help facilitate the process between you and your insurance company and make sure you get the best claim possible. Again, that's Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. And a shout out to sportspider.com. They aggregate all content from around the internet of all sports, but specifically the NHL and the Philadelphia Flyers. You can go there for articles, videos, and audio podcast. Anything you want, they have it there for you. They are our partners. We are pinned to the top. Vasili, thank you for jumping on here. Thank you everybody for listening. Yeah. And we love you guys. And remember, always stay gritty.